Hey, hi, Aanand.
Hey
Good
Rahul,
morning.
good morning,
How are you
man.
doing?
I'm doing awesome. Had a nice tea. Thought like, okay, let's talk something interesting today.
Yes, exactly. And the topic that I have for today is, what is the one thing that you will change about traditional education system? And this question comes by because of the fact that I know you have been learning as a student. You have been in education as a student for like half of your life, and the other half of your life you have been trying to change the education system. So you definitely have a lot to say about this, right?
Yeah, I know,
So
and what I thought should change also has been changing but now that you mentioned it, yeah, both of us actually have been doing this for long enough that it's almost 50-50 right now. Yeah.
exactly.
Yes. From physics teaching to all the way to like trying to yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, but before I begin, what's your take on it? Like, what would you change? What's the first thing that you would change?
I mean, the first thing that I would change, yeah, that's really hard for me to think about, but I would probably incorporate these skills into education system that it is not teaching today. And I feel like these are personality defining traits, personality defining skills, which is hard for us to pick up in future. Like for example, social emotional learning, like emotional intelligence.
Mm.
That becomes really hard to actually change and learn and tweak in yourself later in time, but it is actually really essential with the changing times and the stress that you have in work and everything else in life. This becomes one of the most important things, and I wish I had learned it, many people would have learned it, and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you said it, one thing I could relate to is yeah, I really wish I'd learned it earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was also kind of blind spot. So
Yeah.
yeah, one of the problems definitely is the whole. Here are some of the skills that we now know are essential to succeed, and can be taught. Can we incorporate them? And maybe we make room for it by cutting some of the content. But that's one of the big problems that hey, there are some skills and some knowledge that's the foundation for those skills. That's going to be essential, but our curriculum just doesn't cover that. Is that the first sort of the? I know we don't want to do like is it the most important or something, but that's one of the problems for sure with education right now, which is a curriculum that just hasn't adapted fast enough. And
True, true, true. So I see that, hey, there's a lot of focus on the knowledge that people are trying to teach. And we haven't evolved much from there. I just see that there are multiple curriculums that are kind of building on top of it. For example, CBSE has X amount of curriculum, but if you go to ICSE, there is probably 2x amount of curriculum that they teach. And I learned that the hard way, personally speaking. I was in ICSE till seventh grade, and when I switched school to CBSE, I was like, oh my god, I already know eighth, ninth, 10th of CBSE, and that was
mm,
taught to me by seventh grade. So my life was chill. I suddenly became the topper of the school, and I was like, wow, this is awesome,
so
right?
they cover earlier, right? Like ICSE covers it earlier, and they also cover a larger breadth, and that's
Yeah,
what they. Yeah, I mean, I
exactly.
would say one of the problems, like because we're speaking about problems, is that there is excessive focus on the breadth of content.
Mm-hmm.
And because the breadth is picked so high, it kind of kills the time to do anything that's deepening or skill building using that content as a. Yeah, I would call that like probably one of the top few problems where, okay, see, the curriculum is outdated or that's fine, but even what is being taught, it's just so broad and it makes you that it kind of forces the schools or teachers to focus a bit more on the memorization and a bit more on the testing simply because the breadth of the content.
Yeah, I think you've gone for the core, Anand. Like a lot of these superficial problems actually have the root into, hey, there's so little time and there's
Yeah.
so much breadth to actually cover. Like, hey, why can't we teach financial literacy? Why can't we teach emotional intelligence? There is no time in the curriculum. There is only these many hours available to us in the school year. Where do we make time? That's one of the key problems for every teacher. Even after pandemic, I kind of heard that hey, you know what?
Yeah.
There's so many learning gaps that have been formed for the students. Now, how are we going to cover those 2 years of learning gaps plus teach something new? How are we supposed to
Yeah.
do that? And I guess this is a unique recommendation that you have is that, hey, do we actually have to teach those things? How much do we actually have to cover? What is the core? Find it out
Mhm.
and go after.
Yeah. I think that it's also the easier of the things to implement. Many of the other, hey, let's change the way we teach to be more project based, or hey, let's train the teachers to be a lot more facilitating active learning and all that. It's going to
Mhm.
be a bit of a there are lots of challenges to doing that. But hey, take the curriculum and cut 40% of the content.
Mm.
Um, and depending on hey, some topics themselves can go, and in
Yeah.
some cases the breadth of those topics, say in trigonometry algebraic identities. The breadth can go. It's not really doing much. They get the picture, and it's now like just grunt work of. And I also think it's causing a different problem, which is it's burnout that is unnecessary.
Yeah.
So it's not just that, hey, we can't cover it. If only we can cover it, it's amazing. Even if you could cover it, would you? Like, I mean, it's going into that tree, to the trunk, to the root trunk, etc. Now you're just covering like some thousand leaves, which you don't
Yeah.
cover some of those leaves. It's actually fine. So I would say a good way to cut those, get children to not have those gaps is first take a call in especially middle school and above, particularly high school. Hey, what would I do away with? And the reality, I think you know this, I know this, we wrote JE and everything. Like the reality is that people don't cover, good students don't cover all of
Yeah.
it, especially for exams like JE. It's like this well kept secret. And you do pick some 60%, something like that, and do it really deeply.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe you get a little bit of understanding of the rest, and maybe the school can acknowledge that. By the way, when I spoke to CBSE head and all that, even they were saying, hey, when we write a textbook, it's
Mm.
not like we expect everything to be covered in the classroom. It's just a trivial interpretation of our curriculum.
Mm.
Even the curriculum bodies, and you read those bodies, they do not necessarily tell that, hey, this is the lay of the land.
Mm.
Now, as a teacher and as a school, take the call as to what you'll cover in the classroom deeply and all that. So even if the curriculum is not being cut, at least what's being covered deeply,
Yeah.
and what's going to be like, hey, when we need it, we will go there kind of situation is much better, I think. And that's probably one big problem today, that we just cover like topic after
Yeah.
topic after topic. And because we believe that, hey, everything has to be told in the class. And if we do that, our job is done.
True, true, true. I think this is one of the big difference between, a standard kind of like thinking and one deep way of thinking. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that this is something that we learned when we were, let's say, working at Khan Academy, or now that you have started this startup. And you know that there are thousands of things that you could be doing.
I like how you speak as if I'm doing something, and then you're like, you yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. You're as involved as, so I think you know the exact, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Including Khan Academy, right? I think when we were
Mhm.
trying to like figure out why do this, but yeah, I'm sorry that I interjected. Yeah, you were
No, no,
saying,
no, no worries, no worries. So yeah, I mean, one of the core things that I learned over there is that hey, you could have thousands of ideas and thousands of things to be actually done to meet your mission and vision that you have, but you can't do that. It's not humanly possible. And therefore, one of the core skills that you need to kind of become master at is descoping, is prioritization, right?
yeah,
And I just implement the same thing while designing the curriculum over here. That you know what would you prioritize? What's the one thing that student needs to learn in this chapter? And let's do that really well instead of worrying about, hey, there are so many things to cover. And if
yeah,
you worry that, then yeah, the whole game is lost. You're not able to do justice to the education of the child.
yeah. I mean, I know we've spoken about this before, but somehow I've always noticed when I taught that other teachers
Yeah.
felt it's so wrong to not tell a thing that is there
Mhm.
in the syllabus in the class, but did not find it wrong that they were not working on the deepening of that in the class.
I know.
Somehow, when it came to outsourcing, they chose to outsource the deepening and the active practice and the independent learning time to the home kind of
I
homework
know.
situation,
Yeah.
but kept the telling part of the new things to the classroom. It's almost a cop out. That's the easier part of this.
Hmm.
Imagine you switch this, right? Imagine you couldn't descope that. Hey, the active exploration of a in depth of a topic, and that had to happen in your time because you want to make sure that happens. That's the hard part. That's when
Yeah.
children need most support. That's when
Yeah.
they feel like I'm not getting this, I'm stuck, and that's when you need someone to actually give just the right amount of hint, not give away the answer. Everything, all that hard part is now like an outsource. So there's a lot of hey, no, but I have to tell all the content. No, but no, actually, you're not telling all the content. The deepening part is
Yeah.
anyway, you're throwing it away.
Yeah.
And it's not happening. So, in the prioritization part, one thing I have noticed is why is it that we accept? It's one of the big problems, I think. We've accepted that somehow the practice and the deepening and the struggle can be like not done. That's okay.
I know.
But the content being introduced part is very important. And that cannot be like, I can't leave any topic without being it like introduced. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just worry that, the onus is kind of shifting from the teacher to the student. I
Yeah.
mean, somehow it's my responsibility when I'm in fourth grade, when I'm like, you know what, I want to play with my friends, I want to play video games and all that. I mean, that's natural, right? But somehow it's my responsibility to actually be on top of my homework, finish everything else. And what will happen in classroom is basically, as a teacher, they will just read a couple of pages and then, hey, my job is done. Now it's your
Yeah.
job to actually go deeper and kind of understand things and then, ask more questions and then practice a lot more. I'm like, wait, I don't know if we signed up for this.
I know. And actually, if it was a go home and get deeper, at least. Here's a problem that go home and think about it. It's more tough. It's an unique application of what we discussed in class. Even that's better. while
Mm-hmm.
it would be nicer to incorporate some classroom time for that,
Yeah.
where that itself is happening in a live setting where you're unlikely to give up, while that's better,
Mm-hmm.
at least giving that as homework is good. But I made a reel yesterday about this,
Mm-hmm.
because one of my the parents I was talking to, she was
Mm-hmm.
telling me that in her child's school there is no homework being given, and they're like, hey, what is happening? I don't know. My son is just free in the evening, and he's just like, I don't know, like whatever's gonna happen, gonna happen. पता नहीं कुछ क्या हो रहा है. And it's a new school.
Yeah.
And I dug in and understood the details. And she actually has a good insight about that school, which is that she's like, doesn't look like they have it all figured out. But I did call out to her that homework not being given is not necessarily a bad thing, because
Yeah.
most of the times the homework that you're mentioning, right, is grunt work that
Mm-hmm.
is thrust upon the child, and they have to solve some 50 similar problems of the topic they learned in class that day. It almost feels like a punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Quoting this just yesterday was that the homework done this way actually causes burnout, does not
Yeah.
improve any learning outcomes.
True.
And so it's the other problem as well. Not only is the deepening part being outsourced, even that's not even that's being forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time could have gone into at least deepening at home alone from somebody who's like motivated, goes
Yeah.
into solving 40 similar problems. At the end of it, they're like, hey, maybe math is not fun. I just fooled myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
True.
I
True.
think
True.
that's a huge problem. Like, and I just want to like rant about this for a second. Okay. Homework is one thing
Please.
where, so it's one of the big problems in my opinion. Every stakeholder blames the other stakeholder.
I
I asked
know.
teachers, why are you giving so much homework? You know, it's not very useful. They're like, we know, but the principal is like forcing us to do it. And then I asked the principals, because we do workshops with them. They are like, hey, no, no, we know. There are some parents who are like,
Asking for it.
asking for it. I asked the parents, they're like, 90% of us don't ask them. 10% of the people are like very vocal. They're very loud. They get very panicky when there's no
Mm-hmm.
homework. So there are these parents who watch the child staying free for 5 minutes and freak the fuck out.
I know.
Yeah, they're like, oh shit, how can he be free? It's like my blood pressure is raising or something. And and it's like 10% of, I think it's 10% of the parents. They are like really vocal and loud on these WhatsApp groups, is my assumption.
Yeah.
And then the school is like, oh, like, what do we do? And then they react to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then of all these people, my rant ends with the students. I asked them, hey, how do you find homework? They're like, we know that it's absolute, and especially the astute ones, right, who are very smart. They're like, it's boring, busy work. I just get
Mm-hmm.
done with it so that I can start learning the subject well. So he actually loves the subject so much.
Yeah.
Because one of my students was like, sir, I finish it, or I do it and I do something with it, and then I get to the learning part. So every stakeholder blames somebody else. Nobody here is telling that the school. So the parents are also telling, I don't know why the school is giving so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every stakeholder is doing this. So I think it's one of I'm going for the easier problems that can be solved. So today, when we're talking about problems, I'm not going for the really deep re-engineering of the system that I think we can do and it'll make a big difference. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
what are the smaller ones? You can cut the content, you can cut the breadth, you can decide to focus on some things more.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can stop giving boring, busy homework and actually start, um, at least just leave the time free.
Yeah.
Student might by chance do something deeply, like allow it to happen at least randomly,
True.
uh, or think deeply and then incorporate it in school time if possible, and
I know.
just give
Yeah.
a little bit outside. Yeah, but my rant's done.
I know. I know. I think this is coming from the point that, parents, when they're seeing their kids at home, and what is the child doing? Is the child sitting with his book, or the child playing with his friends, or on laptop, or on TV screen, mobile phone, whatever? That's what this is happening. That's why they're coming from, like, what? I just see him not with his books. I don't know what he's doing in the books. I mean, you could be opening a math book and then lost in your thoughts, right? And that's what parents don't understand, that hey, it doesn't matter what is in front of them, but what matters what's happening in their brain. That's what causes learning quite a lot, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess this is a classic mistake of what you see is all there is, which
Yeah.
Daniel Kahneman talks about. And parents don't, or they can't even go that much deeper to actually understand this, because
Mhm.
they're not having that much prior knowledge of education. So I don't blame them, but I just want to call this out, that hey, this is the classic mistake that you're doing. Your child might still be learning a lot more in their brain if they're just playing with their friends outside. That's even better, right?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, just to mention that, great education systems like Finland and all that, they don't give homeworks.
Yeah.
So it works actually. Yes.
And you were mentioning, right, now that we speak to more parents, I am realizing that some misconceptions about how learning works,
Yeah.
I thought is a small problem. It's actually not a small problem, because it's making them take many minor decisions
Mm-hmm.
in a day-to-day basis just because of their mental model about how learning works,
Mm-hmm.
which is causing this. For example, the core myth I understood or identified when I spoke to this parent was, they believe that practice of any kind causes learning. And
Yeah.
hey, it's better that the child is solving some 30 problems now in that time. Are
Mm-hmm.
you telling me that, hey, is that worse than the child playing? And actually, they don't know it is worse. So
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
myth I caught there was that hey, some practice, even if it's endless on a mindless task, is better
Yeah.
than nothing. So let them do. And if you ask me, the entire tuition industry can be defined by this fundamental myth. Hey, TK
Yeah.
is going somewhere. Not, something is better than nothing, but it's actually not true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Something that burns you out and makes you do something repetitive is actually worse than doing nothing. And
Yeah.
like you said, the focused mode and diffused mode. If you have some amount of focused mode and then you get a diffused mode, your brain's forming connections.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was partly what you see is all there is, and partly a mental model about learning that is not grounded in how learning actually works. To the
Yeah.
point where I'm currently considering making a set of videos on Instagram where parents
Mm-hmm.
watches on what I call the foundation series. Hey,
Yeah.
just a small set of videos on how learning works and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work, like how memory works, how like hey, mindless repetition, does that cause memory really? Or does it?
Yeah.
Or does it not? And things like that. But I really thought that it's not a big deal. Parents are done with education, so it shouldn't matter so much. Uh, but it is mattering in what's making them panic, and also how what kind of feedback they're giving children when these things happen. They might say, "Hey, just suck it up and do the 10 more problems."
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. I mean,
That
that's a,
means you're a good human being, good student.
true.
You're virtuous. Your everything in life is going to turn out well for you, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is a really interesting topic. Like, hey, learning science inspired school system. It's like, hey, when you're going to, or when I have to go to a doctor for something, I look for, hey, what degrees does this doctor have? Do they have
Yeah.
MBBS? Do they have MD, and so on, so forth, right?
Yeah.
But the same thing, what is an equivalent of that in terms of school system? How do I know this? Just CBSE, Cambridge, and all that, that doesn't matter. What matters is the implementation at the end of it. You could be a really, I mean, a well accredited IB school, very costly and all that. But if your implementation is not good, if it's
Mm.
not learning science backed, then nothing else is going to matter. It'll be the, old wine, new water, right?
Yeah. And learning science seems to be reasonably new to the point where even the um, other than educators who are very been in the industry and they've done it like a lot, other than some small percentage of educators, when I speak to principals
Mm-hmm.
who are somewhat aware, they're like, "Hey, I know what you're saying is right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can't train. I'm not able to train my teachers to do this.
Okay.
It maybe where we start is giving them learning science workshops, and I understood that they're right. And then they understand it, and then it's slowly. So it's going to take a while for it to get implemented. But what's the this is the happy situation. The saddest situation is people just don't buy it. I've heard some parents going like,
Yeah.
so the other myth that's driving this, I think, is like, we're talking about the problems, right? Part of it is like the beliefs around, I think there is an overwhelming belief in the new age millennial parents that we know it's a classic myth, but I don't think they fully are aware yet. Hey, children will just learn. Just
I
stop
know.
getting in their way. They will
Mm-hmm.
learn. Uh, they think it's actually one of the best things they can do for their child. But it's actually bad because the child feels like, hey, I should be natural at learning
I know.
instead
Yeah.
of it being treated as a complex cognitive task that gets
Mm-hmm.
better with coaching and practice. And oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's the bad way to learn. So what's making this happen, and I actually feel sad about this, is the best countries, like you say, right, Finland, treat teaching as a domain of professionals.
Mm-hmm.
So they invest not only in hiring as best as they can, but also in professional development in a way that, say, US has kind of failed in. So I was looking at the patterns. The best countries seem to treat it as a profession,
Mm-hmm.
respect it as a profession, and sufficiently set aside enough time that they would for a professional to get better at it. Now, what's the other world? Hey, I could do this if I was at home, but no, I'm so busy, so I'm hiring somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That attitude is actually, I actually personally get pissed off when I hear that from whether it's a parent. I don't hear it from educators, obviously. I feel like, hey, you totally underweight the skill that's there here. Therefore, it's like, hey, I could, if only I had time at home, I would totally do this. But you know what? The smartest, the most educated, very rare do they do this. Very rare. It's like this. I think it's some kind of beginner bias. I think like, or they've not tried teaching. So I think that if the more we treat it as a profession that can be gotten better at, and there's a lot of knowledge, and there is a good way to get children to not just develop the knowledge, but also how to learn itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is also part of the skill to teach them. So I think one of the problems, and it's not widespread, but there is, I think, a little bit of to the point where I even felt, hey, how many people in India do truly believe that teaching is a profession?
Mm-hmm.
You can be expert at it, you can be intermediate at it, you can suck at it. Um,
Yeah.
Truly believe it. Like you'll say it. It's like this virtue signaling thing. Oh, teachers are like so important for the
Yeah.
country. Yeah, but do you really mean it? And if you do, then let's jump into the professional development and how much of the baseline learning science needs to be learned by them to succeed in their job. And your first intuitive idea of how to teach fractions may be wrong. Yeah,
Yes.
probably
Highly
wrong.
likely.
And it is a little bit like an underweighting of the expertise involved in the ordering of teaching it, and also even what knowledge to teach when. Um,
True. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, all of those need like a bunch of decisions, and I think that yeah, there is enough problem there that I think prevents teachers from getting the kind of time they need to professionally develop, kind of get like, because if nobody buys that it's a profession, then nobody's funding it, right? Like,
True.
yeah,
Yeah.
everyone watches signals to you, but nobody funds you. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, there are so many mistakes happening in the system that people have like, you know what, maybe this doesn't work. I can just do it at my home. I mean,
mm,
why is teaching seen as like, you know what, any which ways you learn nothing in school, might
mm,
as well let me do something at home itself, right?
mm,
And do in random ways. And that's why this is coming up because, I mean, you would not have this mentality for a doctor
yeah.
because you know that, hey, there's a lot of prior knowledge required and things like that. I mean, even in the food industry, I just
I
feel
mean,
like,
I would say, sadly, it's lesser, but there are a lot of people who are developing some kind of distrust towards modern medicine.
oh,
And
yeah, that's true.
can I just like tell you what I have a hot take on this, like a pet
Yeah, yeah.
theory. I think there is a tendency in some people to look at the problems of a system and
Mm,
then take the extreme stance against it.
mm,
It's almost like a trauma, like, hey, I look at the problems with it, and of course, the medicine and the hospitals have like huge problems.
yeah,
Traditional education probably, arguably, has even bigger problems. Like, hey,
yeah.
at least that modern medicine has become reasonably scientific and
Mm,
reasonably well adapted. There's enough incentive to do that. There are a lot of specialists. So, but traditional education system has like it's
mhm,
a little bit more significantly more behind. But I think this is happening because the extreme response to that is that,
mm,
hey, you know what? All of it is bad, or
yeah,
hey, not doing it is more is harmful than even not doing it. And
yeah,
I think that's a bit extreme. Depending on how skilled you are, that might be true. If you're actually intuitively a very good teacher and
yeah,
you have a lot of prior knowledge, you have a lot of time, etc., maybe the risk is mitigated. But I do think that there's an extreme response sometimes to problems in the
yeah.
system. Yeah,
I mean, it's just like saying that, hey, you know what, you throw a child into the swimming pool and they will learn swimming. I
correct. It's
mean,
a very romantic idea, right?
yeah,
I
yeah,
think the
yeah,
really romantic idea driving this is that somehow children are natural learners, and that is true for natural language. Will just learn it, but they will not. I think I don't know. Forgot who wrote this. Like I think Charles
thinker.
Darwin wrote this.
Okay,
Uh, he quoted Darwin
okay.
that hey, a child will naturally develop the propensity to speak
Mm,
and listen, but will not develop the propensity naturally to bake, write, or something else. Basically, he's just calling out that there are certain skills that we have now decided as a society that will support those children to develop,
yeah,
and some that will happen evolutionarily. Maybe some long, long later, children will just come with a math acquiring
yeah.
architecture, but it doesn't exist today.
Not
And what
today.
exists is a social architecture to get that to happen, right? Literacy and math and so on. So I
Correct.
do think that underweighting that might actually be doing them disservice. It's like malnutrition for the child versus
Yeah.
like. So I think the extreme response is too much knowledge is being taught in schools. It's not relevant.
Mm,
Therefore, knowledge is not so important. Is the
mm,
wrong conclusion that they have from
correct.
that? I think the right conclusion would be hey, the knowledge needs to be updated. Maybe it needs to be pruned, and what is taught needs to be taught deeply. Because even the skills you were talking about, the foundation for all of them, cognitive research shows is knowledge, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of foundational knowledge needed to show up as those
Mhm.
skills. So that is one of the problems I think in some parents, which is that hey, maybe therefore knowledge is not at all important.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
What the child learns is not important at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's skills all the way down. It's
Mm-hmm.
like turtles all the way. It's like skills all the way down. And I think that hey, but if you keep digging into that question, you realize hey, a lot of things that look like skills are actually knowledge, and it's important to give that. Yeah,
Yeah, without knowledge, I mean, I don't know if there is any skill that is without knowledge. Like, knowledge is the foundation of every single skill. You need to
exactly.
know something to be able to apply, and once you apply, it becomes skill for you.
Exactly. And so instead of concluding we need new knowledge, they conclude we need no knowledge,
No
and
knowledge.
it
Yeah.
just doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I think actually US went in this direction a little bit.
Mm,
I might be wrong in the details here, but I think they took a decision something like, hey, teach them reading skills, but
mm,
the knowledge you're using to teach it, use
yeah.
something around your region, around your and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think been it's done a really good job for the children.
Mm,
Actually, all of us are able to come together cohesively as a society and have cultural literacy
mm-hmm.
because we might be able to have common knowledge. That is, I know,
Yeah.
but I also know that I can reasonably expect you to know.
Correct.
Even an NCRT joke, the India can have an R.D. Sharma joke. That is mad if you think
Yeah.
about it. But I think that's
True.
not a bad thing. Uh,
Yeah.
Having some kind of standard set of things that we can all know that we know each other will know
True.
is actually
Yeah.
not a bad thing. That's actually a feature. That's a good thing about what we have. And that being common is not bad. We can do
Mm-hmm.
more than that, but something that we can all expect each other to know,
Yeah.
I think is what I think that it's kind of, it's part of what makes us culturally coherent with each other. Um,
Got it.
makes us
Yeah.
feel like a generation, makes us feel like we can collaborate. All of it because I can reasonably expect you to know um,
Mm-hmm.
those things, right? So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
I
Totally.
worry that by not weighting knowledge, we lose that. And research also shows that hey, a sudden lack of emphasis on core knowledge can
Mm-hmm.
actually set up children to be really behind later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, this feeling or this emotion, or I know this, yeah, this thing is spreading because of the fact that there are some people showing evidence that, what, my child did this. They did
Hmm.
not do, they did not went to traditional education system. They did not gain the knowledge that was claimed to be required at that point in time. And they succeeded. Look at them. They're doing this, they're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of makes multiple other people kind of attracted toward this like a moth. And, they're like, hey, okay, cool. Maybe, yeah, we should also leave,
Yeah.
quit, do this.
Yeah. And I think it is possible.
Uh,
It's definitely possible for a parent or two parents to create a system that's really personalized for their child, making sure they get these core knowledge areas, maybe from Khan Academy, or I've seen very thoughtful parents do this really well.
mhm,
I
mhm.
do think the time commitment and the expertise is
Yeah.
quite high to get this done, especially as the children grow a little bit older.
Yeah.
Uh, do I think it's possible? Yes. For all parents, probably not, but there are parents I've seen it do it well. And there are parents who I see it doing it badly enough that I feel worried about the child.
Majority of the cases.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, the metaphor that I have experienced when I talk to parents is that, hey, children are here and we want them to go there in terms of having some knowledge and skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're crossing a chasm and it's a bridge
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm trying to build a bridge that will take a lot of people from one side to the other,
Mm-hmm.
and it will withstand a lot of the weight, and but safely take everybody to have the knowledge and skills needed for the future. Now, you can show me another parent who's built like this rope, and the
Yeah.
child's kind of rappelling on it,
Mm-hmm.
and cool, like great. But there's a lot of risks involved with that, and it could be that hey, they pulled it off, and that's awesome. But I'm trying to build a bridge,
Correct.
and I think that professional educators. And on the other side, the problem though is on the other side, there's this really broken road with
Huh.
like this old bridge that's like hey, it could fall anywhere. Some half the children are falling here and there, and people are looking at that. I can't go on that road.
I
So
know.
they're right when they're trying to build their own thing.
Yeah.
So I actually I have respect for the parents who are that caring about the child to you know what I'm going to build at least a rope bridge for my own child, but I'm not letting them
True.
have the
Yeah.
risk of falling on that older bridge because that bridge has some holes and all. Suddenly you're seeing one child, oh, it's like falling down. It's like, oh, and they don't want that. And they're right, right? So I'm going for the grain of truth. I'm steel manning them. The steel man for them is that the current system has sufficient problems, and the bridge also doesn't go all the way. It goes some 75% of the way. After
Yeah.
that, how many of you can jump and catch the other side?
Yeah. Yeah.
Congrats, yeah, you're very smart. It's
That's
like,
a very vivid analogy, Anand. It's very helpful to actually understand this because, I mean, see, this would not work in the terms of medicine, right? A medicine that
yeah,
kills half the people would
yeah,
not be approved, right? The
yeah,
same thing is happening in education that, half the people are not getting the education that is
yeah.
going to be helpful for them. But still, we are like, okay, cool, let this go.
Yeah, it's fine. It's okay. That's the best we can do. And I think we can really challenge that. Is that really true if that's the best we can do? Because I do think even without increasing resources too much, like I know
Yeah.
it always comes down to this belief that hey, oh, if only we had resources,
Yeah.
if oh, we'll just triple the salaries of all the teachers. I'm saying you do that. Right? I mean, government schools today have very good salaries for
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, so it's a lot more. It's a lot more than that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I do think that some attempts to improve it. Um, See, when I say this, right, I always also I'm very aware that every time there's been said in the past, it's not happened.
I know, I know. We are one people who are attempting this, and so
Yeah,
many others have also done the same.
correct. But also, I wouldn't say it's been consistent. It's been the same also. It has gotten better also. I
That's
would
definitely
say,
there.
but I think all claims that it'll be revolutionized and it'll just look so like drastically improved has not happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But with GPT-4 last year and some of these changes, I did feel like it could have like a slightly larger step jump than it had in the
Mm-hmm.
previous cases. Especially in countries like India, where I think parents can vote with their money,
True.
um,
True. Yeah.
which is kind of hard to do in like other places. But yeah, it's curious to find out. Like you said, 50% if it's not working, that drug will probably not get approved very easily in the
Mhm.
medical system. But over here, it's like, hey, and then how do we game it? We say 40% pass means it's enough.
Yeah.
40% mark is like enough to pass, and it's kind of like this weird metric. I actually think keep the content lower, but hold children to a higher standard, and more of those children are scoring like when I say
Yeah. Yeah.
scoring, like able to master
True.
that what is being to be covered. It'll make them feel very efficacious. They'll actually feel like, hey, you know what, I can learn.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think half the children who feel they can't learn, it's not they are not. It's not the right conclusion. Yeah.
Cool. 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 So thanks for that. I think it is, forming a lot of clarity in my head that, hey, you know what, multiple problems in the system, but there is an easier solution, which is like, hey, can we just cut scope of the content that we're trying to enforce on the kids, right? And that likely would solve majority of the problems if done well. Of course, it's not
Yeah.
like, hey, not meaningless cutting, but you'll have to be mindful about what to
Right.
cut. And it's not like, hey, just cut and remove forever. Maybe that comes somewhere later in time, but this kind of frees you
Mm.
up to actually focus on the more important things,
Right.
right? uh, One of the analogies that I have is that education, I mean, physics can't handle two body problem. Like you put two
Mhm.
pendulums and then, like, I don't know what's going to happen. Education seems to be like,
Is
hey,
that two body or three
three
body?
body, sorry, three body
Ha
problem.
ha ha.
And education seems to be like a end body problem. There are like so many stakeholders, so many issues. You move one piece and then the whole castle kind of collapses. So it is complex. Yes, welcome to this. But I guess there are some small tweaks that you can do to help.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, in to say that, you say, right, like I'd probably, I always like it when, while the system's complex, sometimes the next steps, though, like a few next steps at least are very obvious. There are some low-hanging fruits. So here I would say the low-hanging fruits are, one, cut the scope by like 40%, like you said. Hey, cut the homework. Like, what are you doing? Don't give boring busy homework. Actually, one mistake we didn't talk about that I just want to like tell at the end. We'll talk about it deeper later, maybe. Is, hey, don't test too much in the belief that hey, testing very frequently will somehow cost learning. In my school, like
Yeah.
freaks out in 10th standard, they gave me like alternate day cycle tests. Okay, somehow the belief is that hey, if I do this much, so because they're outsourcing the learning part of the test, that I have to do, no.
Yeah.
And so they're essentially just sorting for those children who are kind of able to do that on their own.
Hmm.
A big problem that people are recommending against doing is say increase the time that children are engaging with the material. You can test less frequently.
Yeah. True.
So this belief that hey, so much testing is going on, some learning must be going on. No, oh my
I
goodness,
know.
because there's like posturing to parents about how serious they are,
Hmm.
but they pick the easiest thing to do. I
Hmm.
always notice that. So I would say cut the scope. That needs some little bit more approval. But even as a school, cut it. Nobody. Trust me, children are cutting it anyway. So might as well
Yeah.
just make it official.
True. True.
I would say cut the homework,
Hmm.
almost completely out, or make it like 10% of what you give, maybe.
Yeah.
And then like really reconsider the frequency of your testing and the type of your testing. And these
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
are easy to do. You can keep the same ratio. You can keep the same teachers. If you have time after this, just treat the teachers as professionals and make more time for professional development. And I know it's been hard even for us,
Yeah.
uh, but I would say these are areas that I think that
True. True. True.
I would start with probably as
True.
promise. Yeah.
And I think majority of the parents or teachers who are watching this, they will ask the question, what are kids gonna do in that time? And I'm like, hey, that's don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at all. You figure out what needs to be done, which is like much more important for them. Like, what, give remediation, give feedback, have one-on-ones. Those are the important things that help. Maybe teach SEL skills, financial literacy, coding, all of those things can actually fill up. You probably today don't know about it. Figure out, learn about it, and then see. But don't be worried about this question of what will kids do.
I know, right? Like, not every hour of their life needs to be regimented for them to like succeed. Yeah, and I think that panic is causing a little bit more harm than good for sure. Like, I think we can see that the data on like what causes learning, and nobody says like 8 to 10 hours of like some kind of grunt work is causing learning. So I really like that summary of just letting parents know that hey, we'll figure that out separately depending on your values. Maybe it's a sport, maybe it's just free time reading a book or working on a side thing that they love. And yeah. So in fact, I was the only kid, and my parents never told me like, hey, they just wouldn't even like micromanage that. And a lot of my time was spent learning how to juggle for an entire 3 months. And my dad will be like, okay, he's juggling again. And then I would spend like some time just throwing knives. I'm not making this up. I'm actually reasonably good at throwing knives into cardboard boxes
Wow.
from various distances and juggle three balls. I personally felt, and I really think that there is this art of learning useless things,
Mm-hmm.
which makes you understand learning in and of itself as a process is kind of pleasurable.
True. Yeah.
To just watch it, why is this not happening, and then like kind of have it happen.
Yeah.
And I do think that long term, there is a sense of confidence in your ability to learn simply
Mm-hmm.
because you've spent time kind of roaming around in the forest of things that don't really necessarily matter also. So I think that some amount of time spent doing that is invaluable. And if you regiment all bits,
No.
it's not going to happen. And there's no opportunity for that to kind of
Mm-hmm.
happen.
Yeah, cool. Thanks a lot, Anand. This was super helpful. We talked about one topic and we'll come back and talk about a lot more like, hey, learning science enabled schools, how are they looking like, exams, how to do that, how to study in this world of AI. So, people who are watching, stay tuned for more and keep also letting us know about your questions, which you are interested to know more about.
Yeah, everybody's watching. If there are topics that you want us to talk about, and if you're a parent especially, and if there are questions on your mind that you feel it's very noisy, we'd like to talk about it and provide like a conversational answer to some of those questions. Excited, Ram. Thanks for doing this.
Cool. Awesome.
All right.
Have a nice one then. Bye
Bye.
bye.